Hi everyone, my name is Zodin Tlua and I'm currently studying in Mizoram University MBA. In this video, I'll be talking about monetary policy and its instruments. First of all, I will be talking about the meaning of monetary policy. Monetary policy refers to the credit control measures adopted by the central bank of a country. Johnson defined monetary policy as policy employing central bank control of the supply of the money as an instrument for achieving the objectives of general economic policy. G.K. Shaw defines it as any conscious action undertaken by the monetary authorities to change the quantity, availability, or cost of the money. Monetary policy is a central bank's actions and communications that manage the money supply. The money supply includes forms of credit, cash, checks, and money market mutual funds. The most important of these forms of money is credit. Credit includes loans, bonds, and mortgages. Monetary policy increases liquidity to create economic growth. It reduces liquidity to prevent inflation. Central banks use interest rates, bank reserve requirements, and the number of government bonds that banks must hold. All these tools affect how much banks can lend. The volume of loans affect the money supply. Now I'll be talking about the objectives or the goals of monetary policy. Here are some of the principal objectives of the monetary policy. Number one, full employment. Full employment has been ranked among the foremost objectives of monetary policy. It is an important goal not only because unemployment leads to wastage of potential output, but also because of the loss of social standing and self-respect. Number two, price stability. One of the policy objectives of monetary policy is to stabilize the price level. Both economists and laymen favor this policy because fluctuations in prices bring uncertainty and instability to the economy. Number three, economic growth. One of the most important objectives of monetary policy in recent years has been the rapid economic growth of an economy. Economic growth is defined as the process whereby the real per capita income of a country increases over a long period of time. Number four is balance of payments. Another objective of monetary policy since the 1950s has been to maintain equilibrium in the balance of payments. Now I'll be talking about the instruments of monetary policy. The instruments of monetary policy are of two types. First, the first type of monetary policy is the quantitative, general or indirect, and the second type of monetary policy is the qualitative, selective or direct. They affect the level of aggregate demand through the supply of money, cost of money, and availability of credit. Of the two types of instruments, the first category includes bank rate variations, open market operations, and changing reserve requirements. They are meant to regulate the overall level of credit in the economy through commercial banks. The selective credit controls aims at controlling specific types of credit. They include changing margin requirements and regulations of consumer credit. We may discuss them as follows. Number one is the bank rate policy. The bank rate policy is the minimum lending rate of the central bank at which it discounts first-class bills of exchange and government securities held by the commercial banks. When the central bank finds that inflationary pressures have started emerging within the economy, it raises the bank rate. Borrowing from the central bank becomes costly and commercial banks borrow less from it. The commercial banks, in turn, raise their lending rates to the business community and borrowers borrow less from the commercial banks. There is contraction of credit and prices are checked from rising further. On the contrary, when prices are depressed, the central bank lowers the bank rate. It is cheap to borrow from central bank on the part of commercial banks. The latter also lowered their lending rates. Businessmen are encouraged to borrow more from these banks. Investment is encouraged and output, employment, income and demand start rising and the downward movement of prices is checked. Now is open market operation. Open market operations refers to the sale and purchase of securities in the money market by the central bank. When prices are rising and there is need to control them, the central bank sells securities. The reserves of commercial banks are reduced and they are not in a position to lend more to the business community. Further, investment is discouraged and a rise in prices is checked. Contrariwise, when recessionary forces start in the economy, the central bank buys securities. The reserves of commercial banks are raised. They lend more. Investment, output, employment, income and demand rise and fall in price is checked. Changes in reserve ratios. This weapon was suggested by Keynes in his treatise on money, and the USA was the first to adopt this as the monetary device. Every bank is required by the law to keep a certain percentage of its total deposits in the form of a reserve fund in its vaults and also a certain percentage within the central bank. When prices are rising, the central bank raises the reserve ratio. Banks are required to keep more with the central bank. Their reserves are reduced and they lend less. The volume of investment, output and employment are adversely affected. In the opposite case, when the reserve ratio is lowered, the reserves of commercial banks are raised. They lend more and the economic activity is favorably affected. Selective credit controls. Selective credit controls are used to influence specific types of credit for particular purpose. They usually take the form of changing margin requirements to control speculative activities within the economy. When there is brisk speculative activity in the economy or in particular sector in certain commodities and prices start rising, the central bank raises the margin requirements on them. The result is that the borrowers are given less money in loans against specified securities. For instance, raising the margin requirements to 60% means that the pledger of securities of the value is rupees 10,000 will be given 40% of their value, that is rupees 4,000 as the loan. In case of recession in a particular sector, the central bank encourages borrowing by lowering margin requirements. Now, conclusion. For an effective anti-cyclical monetary policy, bank rate, open market operations, reserve ratio, and selective control measures are required to be adopted simultaneously. But it has been accepted by all monetary theorists that number 1, the success of monetary policy is nil in a depression when business confidence is at its lowest depth, and number 2 is it is successful against inflation. The monetarists contend that as against fiscal policy, monetary policy possesses greater flexibility and it can be implemented rapidly. Thank you.